Hello, hello again, possums. Yes, it is I, the conspicuous moo. And today we're going to go into Green Healer DPS in Final Fantasy XIV. Now, this is a subject that's relatively close to my heart, being a freshly minted level 80 scholar, currently wending their way through Shadowbringers. Now, while most of the feedback from the media tour and, the job reveals and the new skills has been very, very good, there has been one aspect that healers have particularly disliked for quite a long time, called the Green DPS issue. Now, is it really an issue? A lot of people seem to think so, and I'm kind of with them on this one. So I think let's first go into what this problem is supposed to be, and then what are the sort of things that we can do to solve it, or whether it really is a problem at all. Let's get cracking. So, what is a Green DPS by definition? The Green DPS is the healer. Yes, that handy one who's waving their hands around in the background, or in the front, whatever's your poison, and basically keeping you alive. But they also have another important role, which is to deal damage in the time that they're not keeping you alive. So, the mantra of ABC, always be casting, is very much kept in here. A lot of the encounters in Final Fantasy XIV are designed to reflect this as well, and the general consensus within the healer community is that if you're not dealing damage while you're healing, then you're probably doing it wrong in some way. After all, more damage to enemies means less time for those enemies to actually be alive, and less healing overall that is actually required. And you will get your prizes more sooner than if you just stand around and do nothing. So far so good. So what is the Green DPS issue? The complaint is basically healers don't really have that much of a problem dealing damage, for the most part. What they do have a problem is that the damage that they are dealing is incredibly dull due to the very, very few actual attacking damage buttons that they have. Now, of course, your different DPS abilities as a healer are going to vary by which one you do, especially if you're picking Sage for Endwalker. But, at the very basic level, you usually have one damage over time ability, one casted nuke, and an area of effect spell, and that is basically it for everyone. Most of the other things that deal damage in a healer's toolkit will, depend upon certain cooldowns or special conditions to be filled, like Cardia, for example. You can't just cast them endlessly. As Scholar is my central job, I'm going to use quite a lot of examples from there because that's the one I'm most experienced in. Apart from Biolis's Broil and Art of War, which are my basic three, I have Ruin 2 as an instant cast nuke for really casting on the go. Don't really use it in conjunction with anything else because it costs a global cooldown to do that. If I'm desperate to shed Aether Flow stacks for some reason to get a new setup, then I can use Energy Drain. So that is a fairly limited selection to do, so basically your single target rotation will consist of putting down your damage over time, which lasts for 30 seconds, and then nuke, 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 nuke. Oh, the dot's almost running out. Reapply the dot. Nuke, nuke. Or, if you really want to mix it up and you're doing a whole group of monsters, then it's more like dot number 1, dot number 2, dot number 3, if it's worth your time, and then AoE, 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 etc. So, I think you can imagine from that example that, the damage rotation for healers is a little bit simple and severely lacking in entertainment. Casting Brawl 12 times in a row and then reapplying one dot is not particularly scintillating. Now, the high-level healers, the ones who are, very well geared and very good at their job, are reporting that, because they gear quickly, and they're generally very good at what they do, that, they're spending up to half of their entire time during any given encounter just spamming one nuke and easily keeping everyone alive around them. But it's, even if you're leveling as a healer in Final Fantasy XIV and you're getting at least relatively sentient beings in the duty finder, you will likely to be experiencing a lot of downtime between damage going out, and you'll have little else to do but deal that damage. And under 80, your toolkit is going to be even more limited than the ones at the top. At least, when it comes to doing overworld content such as, say, Fates, you can at least switch to another job that, will damage more effectively and more interestingly and with greater flavors. But, there definitely isn't consensus across the board on this one, and so let's, have a discussion about the different perspectives that are coming across in this debate. Now the first obvious solution is to do more detailed damage rotations for healers. I mean, I know that's bleeding obvious, but I've got to cover everything here. So one healer damage rotation that is revered from the ancient past, I never got to experience because I've only just arrived, is the lesser spotted Scholar Heavensward variety. So I took a look at that. So first of all, you have a clerical stance, which basically does additional damage but does less healing. It's a trade-off ability. So you switch to your cleric stance and then you have 3 dots, not just one. You have Bio 2, Miasma and Bio. Then you cast Bane, which I think is something you get with Arcanist, which spreads the dots out to everybody else. Then you would cast Shadow Flare, which is a targeted AoE, kind of like Sacred Soil, but bad news in purple. And then Miasma 2, which is an AoE around the self, much like Art of War, or Holy. And then in single target you have Aero, which is another damage over time, but that isn't affected by Bane. I think it's only Bio and Miasma that were affected by Bane. And then of course you've got Broil, Void Broil, and then Energy Drain if you needed it as well. And, you know, basically you went into your DPS rotation and you just kept your dots up as much as possible to maximize your damage. But, you know, that is a lot more on the table for a Scholar back at Heavensward than we definitely have, you know, on the edge of Endwalker at the moment. You know, there is complexity there that, you know, just simply doesn't exist in the modern healer. So, I mean, from a drawback perspective, I totally get, you know, that it's going to be too hard or too distracting for lesser skilled healers such as myself. And, you know, I'm going to need to know instinctively when I've really got to change out of my DPS and go back to keeping people alive again. Because you can DPS all you want, but if you know, your entire party is dead, that's pretty much a wipesy. Another perspective is the do no harmers. Now these are the people who say, look, I'm a healer, I was born a healer, my job is to heal, that's what I'm going to do, I'm just going to heal and that's it. So, you know, this is the other side to the Green DPS team. And it's quite a popular one as well. It's not one that I personally agree with, but you know, these healers don't want to do damage. They're in the job to heal things, and you know, if they wanted to damage things more, then they would switch to a damage dealer to do that. You know, now that's a totally valid opinion. But, you know, and it does have to be said that, you know, if you're not doing, you know, the very, very top level stuff, you are actually, you know, physically allergic to dealing damage as a healer, you know, you can just stand there in most low level content, keep people alive, and everyone will be absolutely fine. But it is worth bearing in mind that if you choose to do that, then you won't be doing your party any favors, because everything will just take longer. And like it or not, you know, at those higher play levels, you will be expected to deal damage as a healer, and you are very likely to be called out for it as well, if you are not pulling your weight. So, you know, dealing damage as a healer really at the moment, because of the way that the game is designed, is probably something that all healers should be practicing as early and often as possible. But if the do no harmers want to prevail, then the game design itself would have to change in order to, you know, have far more greater emphasis on healing, which moves us on to number 3. Now, one way to solve the Green DPS problem is to remove the time available to do damage in the first place. So if you amp the damage up, that is going out and hitting your group in the kneecaps, then you won't have all that much time to deal any damage or put out dots or anything else, because everyone around you is a global cooldown away from being deleted. Seems like a fairly straightforward thing. More damage means more healing. Easy. Simples. The problem is probably going to become in balancing. Now, the balancing aspect is going to get very, very tricky because, you know, you have a broad range of healers with a broad range of skill levels, and if you know, increase damage received up to a point where a reactive healer can't bring people back up again because they're already dead, then, you know, the likes of white mages and astrologians and Endwalker are going to have a pretty choppy time finding groups. Because everyone would just want a scholar or a sage who can, you know, as a mainly proactive barrier healer sets, they would, you know, mitigate the damage before it even goes out. So, you know, problem solved there. Similarly, you know, if you do too little damage to the group, then, you know, we'll get the same problem that, you know, a lot of healers are experiencing now, which is, you know, competent healers casting Brawl for half of the time while falling asleep at the keyboard. So, you know, from my perspective, I don't really envy the Square Enix developers on attempting to get that kind of balance correct. And of course there's the fourth option, which is do nothing, leave things as they are. You know, this is a perfectly valid option, and you know, suffice it to say that we're never going to have all-around agreement on, you know, the green DPS problem, whether it's a problem or not in the first place, and how to fix it, and it's probably impossible to satisfy everyone, so why not just keep the status quo? I guess for me the main problem is that I'm seeing healers already commenting that they're already chronically bored, and they look like they're going to be equally so in Endwalker as well. And you know, they might eventually stop healing and do other jobs, which is fine, but you know, it can't ever be a good thing. You know, healing is a role that is always in demand, so you need to make it as appealing as possible to as many players as possible. And you know, I personally believe that, you know, the people who are pushing for more varied green DPS rotations, you know, they don't want to make things as difficult as possible for everybody else, you know, players who are new to the role, who aren't as skilled or don't play at that level. I suspect it's much more of a way to have a method by which they can distinguish themselves from others by being able to bring more damage to the table than someone who is less skilled. You know, that way, you know, everyone still gets to do the basic healer things and the basic damage things, but if you really want to push the envelope, then the abilities would be there to enable you to do that. You know, and of course it also gives something for other players to aspire to. And I suppose at my current point in my scholarly Final Fantasy XIV journey, that's about where I am in the green DPS debate. I think the toolkit could do with being a little bit more spicy, but you know, I'm also of the opinion it doesn't have to be just raw damage. You know, it could be buffs to players, or removing buffs on enemies, or debuffs, crowd control. All sorts of different possibilities are available. They can't be too impactful, otherwise you take one healer over the other, but they could still be useful. And you know, I've got to be honest, I think I would have loved being a scholar in Heavensward. I mean, you know, just so many dots going out and having to maintain them and heal at the same, sounds like a crazily busy scholar to be. But you know, I'm still looking forward to scholar in Endwalker, of course. Of course, of course, of course, of course, of course, of course, of course. So, to finish up, let's go over some of the changes which are going to be happening in Endwalker that, you know, might mix things up with this whole green DPS issue. So, first of all, the main castable nuke for each of the healers is going to be reduced to a 1.5 second cast before, you know, spell speed gets counted in. So, you know, that does mean you'll be able to weave in additional off-global cooldown abilities, because the global cooldown is 2.5 seconds, so you'll have a second to weave additional stuff in. You know, unfortunately that doesn't really affect how often you know, you'll still be spamming broil if you're a scholar to stay awake during downtime between damage phases. We also have to bear in mind that there is an incoming stat crunch, and you know, the in-progress potency numbers for healing that we got from the media tour are also, you know, worth having a bit of a scrutiny at. Now, of course, those potency numbers are subject to change before and after launch, but you know, there's scope for adjustments there that could very much affect, you know, our green DPS uptime. Scholar Fairy potencies, for example, are largely down across the board in the initial numbers pass that they've given to us. So, you know, perhaps there's a future where more healing is going to be required at the expense of your personal damage, because your fairy isn't as strong as it is now in Shadowbringers. Then, of course, we have, you know, interviews with Yoshi P at the media tour, sort of talking about the sort of thing and what, you know, he envisages for healers and the developer team in general. The media tour interview he gave to Miztec in particular was very interesting, because she asked a lot of healer-specific questions. So if you haven't seen it, I do recommend you have a look at it. But, you know, the general gist is that, you know, he thinks that healers should be healing more, so that, you know, healers are a bit more busy, and that's the kind of trend that they're working towards in terms of encounter design. So, I mean, but, you know, he also stated that that was since 5.0, so since Shadowbringers, and, you know, there are plenty of healers from Shadowbringers, you know, who've experienced all of the content, who are having this green DPS problem, so we'll see how that one goes. He does acknowledge, though, you know, that it is really tough to get right, as different healers want different things from the encounters that they design. And he also said that, you know, they didn't want content to be so healer-intensive that you are healing constantly in order to keep everyone alive, or you have to worry too much about your MP. I mean, MP management isn't that fun a mechanic in the first place. You know, you should be able to keep an eye on it, and you should have the abilities to regain it, but to run out of it constantly or have to basically triage as to who lives or dies, that's an aspect of gameplay I don't think they're really going for here. So, you know, basically they don't want to make the content so difficult that, you know, lesser skilled healers, you know, would be unable to take part because it's all just too hard. Sadly, you know, although one of the questions was actually, you know, pointed at the entire Green DPS problem, he didn't really address, you know, the rotational aspects of it, just that, you know, more healing is likely to be required on Endwalker. So it does sound, from a designer's perspective at least, that, you know, our healers will, you know, as at the start of every expansion, are going to be finding themselves a little harder pressed to keep people alive. But, you know, I also suspect that, you know, that's going to get progressively easier and easier as the gear levels rise again, stat crunch or otherwise, and we are eventually going to get into the same position we are now, where we're spamming Broil for half of the encounter. So it doesn't sound like there's an awful lot of progress there, but we can only hope. Anyway, that's it. So what do you all think? I mean, should we be doing more or less Green DPS? Are you happy with things as they are, or do you just want more buttons to press, a bit more complexity? Would you sacrifice some additional damage for a bit of utility? Or, you know, do you regularly brand your healer with a red hot poker when they're just standing there not dealing any damage? Let me know what you think about the Green DPS problem, and I will be back relatively soon. So, I am the conspicuous Moo, and to spamming Broil with you.